Hi, my name is Lori Barrow. I am presenting my senior capstone project on pastoral burnout called Toward Sustainable Ministry, a multidimensional analysis of pastoral burnout and its contributing factors. The purpose of this study is to examine the contributing factors associated with pastoral burnout and analyze the interventions suggested in current research. Addressing pastoral burnout requires personal formation, structural clarity, and organizational support to prevent and mitigate its impact. This study looks at pastoral burnout, specifically what contributes to it and what current research suggests actually helps address it. The key idea guiding my paper is that burnout is not solved by any one thing. It requires personal formation, structural clarity, and organizational support working together. What makes this issue significant is the level of distress that pastors are experiencing. Research shows that pastors' distress levels are as high as 59%, which is comparable to high trauma care professionals like physicians. Burnout itself is more than just fatigue. It's defined by emotional exhaustion, a sense of detachment, and reduced effectiveness in work. So we're not just talking about being tired, we're talking about a deeper kind of depletion. Burnout was first studied in the primarily in the helping professions like healthcare, social services, teaching in the 1970s, and it was applied to the clergy during the 1990s. Specifically, pastors are vulnerable because of two things: interrole conflict, which is when work and family roles overlap, and emotional labor, where the constant need to manage and carry others' emotions impacts the pastor's daily life. So, with that foundation, I want to briefly look at what research says about burnout more broadly. My literature review. So, what is burnout? Burnout is widely understood to be a prolonged response to significant fatigue, exhaustion, and cynicism, exacerbated by emotional and personal stressors on the job. And what's important here is that research consistently shows that burnout is multidimensional. It's not just emotional, it's not just work related, but it's relational and it's spiritual as well. Pastors aren't the only ones who experience burnout, but the way that ministry is structured creates unique vulnerabilities. So this isn't a minor issue. Nearly half of pastors considered leaving ministry in recent years. 42% of pastors considered leaving ministry in 2022. Now, that was a spike because of COVID-19, and after COVID-19 kind of dissipated a bit, those numbers did see a decrease. However, 24% were still considering leaving in 2025. There's still a significant level of ongoing distress. What's striking is that pastors report distress levels similar to physicians, but without the same institutional supports. This indicates ongoing vulnerability, not a resolution in pastoral burnout. Across the research, there's strong agreement that burnout is complex and it doesn't have a single cause. Because of that, it doesn't have a simple solution. Literature consistently points to a holistic response: personal, organizational, spiritual. Superficial solutions are going to be ineffective. Sets up our next section of what actually drives burnout, the contributing factors. As I said, burnout doesn't just come from one place, it's the result of multiple factors working together. These pressures can be relational, organizational, emotional, spiritual, and demographical. The key is not just what they are, but how they reinforce each other. One of the biggest pressures that pastors face is the overlap between ministry and family life. This is also often called work-family conflict, or WFC in the literature. There's often no clear boundary between being a pastor and being at home. There's constant competing expectations. Not a clear start and stop time to working impacts not just the pastor's work schedule, but the family life. Oftentimes, this creates tension in the home because the pastor may be there the pastor may be there physically, but they're not present emotionally or mentally. This often leads to exhaustion and strained relationships in the pastor's family, and also strained relationships in the congregation. The role complexity in ministry is another contributing factor to pastoral burnout. Pastors are expected to do far more than preach. They're leading, they're administrating, they're organizing, and they're caring. They're expected to carry the load of multiple roles all on one person. And often pastors don't have formal training for these roles. They're not trained in how to do reporting. They're not trained in how to do bookkeeping. They're not trained in how to do organizational leadership at times. Pastors don't step into the job expecting to be handyman. We always joke about that at our church with it's just my husband and I as the pastor, and we're often identifying those types of things. Like we did not become pastors to have to work on the sprinkler system. And this happens to pastors all over. The problem is that without clear expectations, there's no real sense of when the work is done. In other churches, they might have structures that are pastor-centered, where everything revolves around the pastor. This also creates a lot of added pressure, which leads to overwhelm and reduced job satisfaction. Another contributing factor is the emotional labor element. Ministry requires managing your emotions constantly, how you respond, what you show, what you carry. We have to manage our emotions to meet other people's expectations. There's expectations on pastoral and clergy of how they should respond, how they should act, what they should feel, and pastors often have to engage in surface acting or deep acting to communicate and meet the expectations of the congregation. Surface acting is when a pastor or person pretends to feel what is expected of them. So if a congregant expects them to feel sad, then they are pretending to be sad on the surface level. Deep acting is when they're genuinely trying to feel an emotion deep inside, not just pretend that they feel it, but deeply feel it. Both of these can be emotionally exhausting, and they can lead to depersonalization because the pastor doesn't understand or can't identify what their true emotions are. This can also play out in physical health issues. Our mental and emotional states affect us physically as well. And this is just compounded by compassion fatigue of always being on call for people when they go through traumatic events, and then secondary trauma, just reliving your own traumas as you're walking through others' trauma with them. Another contributing factor that is unique to the pastoral position has to do with calling and identity. When burnout happens, it doesn't just affect the work, but it can affect how pastors understand themselves and their relationship with God, because calling is tied to identity in a pastor's mind. Their job has been ordained or given to them by the Lord. When they experience burnout, it can become a crisis of calling. Did they hear God right? Are they doing the right thing? And this can increase the burnout and anxiety that pastors may be feeling. However, having a high calling can be both a buffer and a risk factor to pastoral burnout. As I said, with the risk factor, having a calling and experiencing burnout can lead to more confusion. However, having a high calling and taking great joy and pride in what you do can be a strengthening factor against pastoral burnout. When burnout happens and pastors question their relationship with God, it can lead to something that's called acedia. It's a kind of spiritual and emotional numbness, and pastors can feel disconnected from God and disconnected from people. When this symptom comes up, you know that a pastor is in deep burnout and needs some immediate intervention. The cumulative impact of pastoral burnout, of all of these factors on pastoral burnout, is significant because the factors don't operate independently, that they compound over time and reinforce one another. Barna had a great survey that just demonstrates this fact of the well-being of pastors, how pastors rated their own well-being. This is from 2021, and only 35% reported having a healthy overall well-being. So you can see that burnout is relational, it's emotional, it affects their spiritual well-being, their physical well-being, vocational well-being, financial well-being. The burnout has relational, emotional, organizational, and spiritual elements that impact pastors. So, addressing burnout. Some strategies and recommendations. Because burnout is multidimensional, the response has to be as well. It means addressing personal, spiritual, and organizational levels together. If we only focus on one, we're missing the root of the problem. And pastoral burnout cannot be solved by self-care alone. A spiritual retreat, a weekly day off, a family vacation, these things are going to help prevent pastoral burnout over long term if combined with other things, but they are not going to solve the problem individually. A key element to dealing with personal contributing factors to pastoral burnout is personal formation. And a key strategy here is developing differentiation of self, separating your identity from your role. This is especially important for pastors as our calling is so combined with our identity. The more that we can operate from a differentiation of self, seeing our role as pastor separate from our identity as a child of God, the more stable we are in our identity as a child of God, and gives us a firm foundation to go through difficult times or times of stress, anxiety, depression, or actual pastoral burnout. This helps pastors stay grounded even when ministry is demanding. Practically, these include setting boundaries, rest, having a Sabbath, working on emotional regulation and emotional awareness, taking time off, and incorporating self-care practices like exercise and nutrition and drinking water and getting sleep and doing the things that all humans need to be able to have a thriving and sustainable life. Secondly, there's spiritual practices. Spiritual practices are essential for pastors. They're not just devotional, they're restorative. Spiritual practices address the deeper identity and calling issues that burnout affects. Practices like Lectio Divina, the examine, and centering prayer reconnect meaning and emotional processing. By focusing on the word and how it applies to the pastor personally, what God is saying helps the pastor remain grounded in their personal walk with God, becoming energized because of time in the Spirit. A daily examine helps the pastor process their emotions and learn how to emotionally regulate. The outcomes of these practices increase ministry satisfaction and, like I said, helps the pastor with emotional processing. And lastly, we need structural support. This is where the conversation shifts. It's not just a personal responsibility, it is a community responsibility. Churches need to support their pastors for long-term ministry. Clear job expectations, shared leadership, realistic workloads. These are essential elements for pastors. Without structural support, individual efforts aren't going to be enough. Pastors need these job descriptions. They need leadership and management training. If churches are going to increase the responsibility and roles and tasks that pastors are expected to do, then churches need to, in equal measure, provide training on how to accomplish those tasks. And they also need to have conversations about the pastoral capacity and what they can fit in to a normal kind of work week, because ministry, helping people, those don't fit in 9 to 5 hours, but a lot of these management tasks can. Shared leadership and delegation is important for pastors to learn how to do as well. And churches need to have good time off policies. They need to have sick leave. They need to have these things, these structures in place that help pastors know that the church cares more about them as a person than even they do about their role as pastor. Burnout is not just a personal failure, it's a system issue. So, pastoral burnout, it needs an integrated response. The most effective response is going to integrate all 3 areas: personal growth, spiritual practices, and organizational support, and they have to work together. Otherwise, we're only treating the symptoms. We're not getting to the root of the problem. So, in conclusion, pastoral burnout is not a single issue problem. It's the result of multiple pressures working together. It affects not just the pastor, but their family and the church as a whole. So, sustainable ministry requires intentional formation, structural clarity, and shared responsibility. Sustainable ministry is not built on individual endurance, but it is built on shared responsibility and community, both the church and the pastor working together for longevity, a thriving ministry, and sustainable leadership. Thanks for listening to my presentation.